Tentao, you never forget the sound of machines breathing for someone you love. The rhythmic hiss, the soft beeps, each one a reminder that time is slipping through your fingers, and money can decide whether you get to hold them again. That was me, sitting by my son's hospital bed, watching his small chest rise and fall beneath tubes and wires. He was only 6. Too young to understand why his heart had turned against him. Too innocent to know that his grandparents, my parents, had just spent over 230,000 on my sister's princess wedding, yet refused to give 85,000 to save his life. Tata, I remember the day I begged them. My father sat in his armchair, sipping tea, while my mother scrolled through her phone, showing pictures from the wedding. "You're being dramatic," she said. "We just helped your sister with her once, in a lifetime event. We can't keep paying for everyone's problems." Everyone's problems. That's what they called my son's failing heart. Tada, I didn't yell. I couldn't. The kind of pain I felt then doesn't scream. It goes quiet. It turns your voice into glass. "How's your grandson?" I whispered. "He's dying." My father looked away, guilt flickering for just a moment before disappearing behind the cold armor of pride. "You've made your choices, Rachel," he said. "You chose to have a family you can't afford. Don't put that on us." Tada, I walked out of that house with trembling hands and a heart full of something darker than sorrow. It wasn't hatred. It was clarity. The kind that only comes when love dies in front of you. Tada, that night, sitting beside my son's bed, I stared at his small hand clutching mine, and I made a promise. If money was the language my parents spoke, then I would learn to speak it louder. I wouldn't just beg for their help. I would make them watch as I built everything they thought I needed them for. Tada, it started small. Fundraisers, freelance work. Sleepless nights balancing bills and medications. The world wasn't kind, but it was fairer than family. Strangers donated. Friends showed up. And one day, a doctor called and said, "We can do the surgery." The funds cleared. Tata, I cried like the sky had split open. Tata, my son lived. But something in me didn't. The daughter they'd known, the obedient one, always grateful, always giving, she was gone. Tata, months later, I attended my sister's post-wedding brunch. The same sister whose a $230K wedding could have saved my son twice over. She hugged me, perfume heavy, diamonds glinting. "You look tired," she said softly. "But I'm glad you're okay." Tadao, I smiled. "I'm better than okay." Tada, because they had spent all their money on appearances. Te and I had learned the priceless power of self-worth. Tada, but I wasn't done. Not yet. Revenge doesn't always come in the form of rage. Sometimes it arrives dressed as success. Te and mine was coming. Tajaojakunda grief is a strange kind of fire. It burns you hollow, but if you're brave enough to stay inside the flames, it forges something unbreakable. After my son's surgery, I learned to live with scars, his and mine. Every scar carried a lesson, and mine whispered one truth over and over: never beg for love that comes with conditions. Tada, I went back to work 2 weeks after his operation. My job at a small marketing agency barely paid the bills, but it kept me moving. Every campaign I designed, every deadline I hit, it wasn't just work. It was a declaration. My parents had spent $230K to buy my sister a fairy tale. I was going to earn my son a future. Tada, at night when he slept, I'd sit by his bedside with my laptop glowing in the dark. I began taking freelance clients, small businesses, local shops, nonprofits that couldn't afford big agencies. I poured myself into their stories. Within a year, I built a name for myself as the woman who could make anything grow online. People started calling me the Phoenix Marketer because, they said, I rose from the ashes of everything that tried to destroy me. Tadao, then came the call that changed everything. A venture capital firm noticed my work and offered funding to start my own digital brand consultancy. It was surreal. Me, the daughter they'd dismissed, the single mom they pitied, was now negotiating 6-figure deals from a laptop in her living room. Tada, but money wasn't the real win. The real victory was how it changed me. Every dollar I earned wasn't just income. It was dignity. It was proof that I didn't need my parents' approval, or their money, or their pity. Tada, still, I couldn't lie. A part of me wanted them to see it, to know, to regret. Tada, so when I launched my company, Rise and Bloom Strategies, I sent formal invitations to my family. My sister texted a half-hearted, "Congrats." with a selfie from Bali. My parents didn't respond at all, and strangely, that silence didn't hurt. It fueled me. Tada months later, I saw an announcement online my father's business was struggling. Decades of bad management, flashy spending, and ignoring advice had caught up with him. He was looking for investors. Tada, something inside me stirred. Not vengeance. Opportunity. Tada, because poetic justice doesn't come knocking. You have to build the door yourself. Tianzhao, when I met with a group of partners to discuss potential acquisitions, one of them slid a folder across the table. There's a small, family-owned company on the edge of bankruptcy, he said. They're desperate for a marketing overhaul and new investors. The CEO's name is Richard Holloway. Dada, my heart stopped. Richard Holloway, my father. Tata, I sat there quietly for a long moment, letting the irony settle like a slow wave. Life had handed me a script too perfect for coincidence. Tenta, the same man who refused $85,000 to save my son's life, now needed investors to save his. Tada, and the person sitting across the table, with the power to make that decision, was me. Tadadagadzao. When I first saw his company's name printed in that neat, black font across the investment file, I swear I felt the air shift. It wasn't anger. It wasn't joy. It was something deeper. A quiet reckoning that fate had circled back to my doorstep, asking what kind of person I'd become. Jaja, that night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and replayed his words from that day in his living room. You chose to have a family you can't afford. My son's face, pale and fragile under hospital lights, flashed before my eyes. My father had looked at his grandson's life and seen only numbers. And now the numbers had turned against him. Jaja, the next morning, I requested a full report on his company. Declining profits, unpaid taxes, staff layoffs. It was worse than I imagined. Years of pride and extravagance had drained him dry. He'd mortgaged part of his home and was on the verge of bankruptcy. His business, once a symbol of authority in our family, was rotting under its own arrogance. Tada, my partners waited for my decision. If you want, Rachel, we'll buy it, one of them said. It's a failing ship, but we can turn it around. I didn't answer right away. I asked for 2 days. Tadar 2 days to decide whether I'd be my father's savior or his karma. Tajal, when I finally drove to his office, I felt like a ghost walking into the ruins of my past. The building looked tired, paint peeling, nameplate fading. Inside, my father was hunched over his desk. The same posture I remembered from childhood. But now, it wasn't authority that bent his shoulders. It was defeat. Tada, he looked up as I entered, his eyes widening in disbelief. Rachel. Tajai, Dad, I said evenly, setting the folder on his desk. I came to talk about your company. Taja, his jaw tightened. Are you one of the investors? Taja. I'm the investor. Taja, the silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. For the first time in my life, he didn't know what to say. His gaze dropped to the folder, then back to me, searching for anger. He didn't find any, just calm. Taja, I can buy your company, I said, and rebuild it. You'll keep your job title, but I'll control the operations. In return, I'll protect your employees, pay off your debts, and get you out of this mess. Jaja, he blinked. Why would you do that, after everything? Tetsa, I leaned forward, voice steady. Because when my son was dying, I learned something about money. It can't buy love, but it can expose who actually has it. Jaja, he swallowed hard. And this is your revenge. Tatsat, I smiled faintly. No, Dad. This is mercy. Revenge would be letting you drown. Tatsat, I stood up, leaving the papers signed and the room heavy with silence. Ada, as I walked out of that fading empire, I realized something. The sweetest revenge isn't watching them fall. It's watching them live long enough to understand what they lost. Dada, and my father had just started learning. Dada, the next morning, the headlines read local firm acquired by rising marketing powerhouse, Rise and Bloom Strategies. My phone didn't stop buzzing all day. Business circles whispered about the mysterious investor who had swooped in to save the dying company. No one knew the truth, that it wasn't a corporate move, but a personal reckoning. Tenja, when I walked into my father's office that day as the new CEO, the air felt different. Gone was the scent of entitlement and superiority that used to fill these walls. The employees watched me carefully, most of them too polite to say what they were thinking, Isn't she the boss's daughter? The one he never spoke kindly of? Tada, yes. That was me. But not anymore. Tada, good morning, everyone, I said, standing before them in the conference room. From today, we're building something new. This company has spent years chasing appearances instead of purpose. That changes now. Tata, I laid out a plan: modernize operations, rebrand with authenticity, bring in transparency and fair pay. People listened. Some with doubt, others with hope. My father sat in the corner, silent, his pride a fragile mask. But I saw it, the flicker of realization that his daughter had become the kind of leader he'd never been. Chata, weeks passed. The transformation began. The company started breathing again. Clients returned. Employees smiled. The old toxic culture that fed on arrogance was slowly replaced by a pulse of purpose. And every success, every contract signed, every life changed. It was all another stitch in the wound my parents once left open. Tata, at home, my son watched me build. He was stronger now, recovering, playful, with that spark in his eyes again. Mom, he said one night, you're a superhero. I laughed softly. Superheroes fix what others break, I told him. That's all I'm trying to do. Tada, but deep down, I knew this wasn't just about fixing a company. It was about rewriting a story. For years, my parents had believed I was the lesser child, the one who made practical choices while my sister lived the fairy tale. They thought love was measured by status, by who could host the bigger wedding or wear the flashiest ring. They were wrong. Tata, and I was going to show them, quietly, gracefully, that integrity could outshine any chandelier. Tata, a month later, the company hit record profits. News outlets called it a miraculous turnaround. Investors flocked in. My name began appearing in interviews and business magazines. My parents couldn't ignore it anymore. Tada, my mother called one evening. Her voice trembled. Your father told me what you did for him, she said. You didn't have to. Tada, I know, I said softly. But I wanted to show you something. Tada, what? She asked. Tada, that love can build more than money ever could. Tada, there was a long silence. Then, for the first time in years, she whispered, I'm proud of you. Tada, it should have felt like victory. But it didn't. It felt hollow. Because I realized something in that moment. I hadn't wanted their pride. I wanted their humanity. Tada, and now that I had both power and peace, I had to decide what to do with them. Tada, it started with an invitation. Ironic, considering everything that had happened. A cream-colored envelope arrived at my office, sealed with gold foil and my sister's name embossed on the front. Inside, a handwritten note. Family dinner. No excuses this time, Mom insists. Love, Claire. Tada, family dinner. Those words used to mean warmth, laughter, familiarity. Now they just felt like ghosts from another life. But something inside me, curiosity, maybe closure, told me to go. Tada, when I arrived at my parents' house, it was almost surreal. The same walls that once echoed with judgment now stood quiet, humble. My mother met me at the door, eyes softer, movement slower. You look radiant, she said. There was no fake smile this time, no tone laced with competition. Just sincerity. Tada, inside, my father was setting the table, something I'd never seen him do. His once commanding presence now carried a kind of fragility. Rachel, he said, nodding slightly, as if unsure how to act around me. I nodded back, polite but guarded. Tada, then came my sister, Claire, the golden one. Still elegant, still polished, but with a nervous energy that hadn't been there before. You actually came, she said with a nervous laugh. I thought you'd never speak to us again. Tada, neither did I said, smiling faintly. But I'm here now. Tada, dinner was civil, surprisingly so. We talked about neutral things, business, my son's school, the weather. But underneath, tension simmered like a quiet storm. Everyone knew why we were really there. Finally, it was my father who broke the silence. Tada, I read the article in Forbes, he said. They called you a visionary. Tada, did they? I said softly, sipping my water. Tada, he nodded, eyes flickering with pride and regret. You've done incredible things. Things I never believed you could. Tada, there it was, the unspoken apology hidden behind pride. Tada, I didn't do it for recognition, I said. I did it because I had to. My son needed me to be strong, and I realized no one was coming to save us. Tada, my mother looked down. We were wrong, she whispered. We thought we were helping your sister build a future. We didn't see that we were destroying yours. Tada, for a long time, no one spoke. The sound of the clock ticking filled the space between us. Then Claire reached across the table, her diamond bracelet glinting under the light. I didn't know Rachel. I swear. I thought they'd helped you too. I didn't know about the surgery, about how bad it was. Tada, her voice trembled, and for the first time, I believed her. Tada, I know, I said gently. It wasn't your fault. But now you do know, and I hope you see how expensive blindness can be. Tada, tears welled in her eyes. My father wiped his face silently, an action I never thought I'd see. Tada, Rachel, he said hoarsely. You saved my company. You didn't have to. You could have let me fail. Why? Tada, I looked at him, my voice calm and steady. Because I didn't want to become you. Tada, he froze. The room went quiet again. Tada, that was the moment I realized revenge doesn't always roar. It whispers. It lives in restraint, in mercy that cuts deeper than cruelty. Tada, I stood, gathering my bag. Dinner was nice, I said softly. But I think it's time I go. Tada, as I walked out, my mother called after me, Rachel. Please, can we see him? Your son? Tada, I turned. Maybe. Someday. When I know you're ready to love without conditions. Tada, and for the first time in years, I saw my father cry. Tada, the weeks after that dinner were strangely quiet. My parents didn't call, didn't text. The silence wasn't cold this time. It was reflective, almost reverent. Like they finally understood that their words had weight, that their choices had carved scars they couldn't hide behind apologies. Tada, but fate has a way of keeping lessons alive. Not long after, my sister's perfect world began to crack. It started with whispers. Her husband's business was failing, investors backing out, rumors of mismanagement. Then came the headlines: luxury event planner faces lawsuit after $400K wedding fraud scandal. Tada, I saw it online one morning, scrolling absently between client emails. The same magazines that once featured her smiling face under chandeliers were now tearing her down. I felt a flicker of pity, but no satisfaction. Karma didn't need applause. It simply needed witnesses. Tada, that night my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice trembled. Rachel, Claire's in trouble. Tada, I sighed softly. What kind of trouble? Tada, she might lose her house, she said, breaking down. Her husband's accounts are frozen. The police. Tada, I cut her off gently. I'm sorry, Mom, I really am, but I can't fix this. Tada, there was silence, then a sob. Please, don't turn your back on your sister the way we turned ours on you. Tada, those words pierced deeper than I expected. Because they weren't manipulation this time. They were remorse. The next day, I visited Claire. She looked nothing like the woman I remembered. Her hair unkempt, eyes swollen, surrounded by unopened mail and wilted flowers from guests who no longer visited. I messed up, she said through tears. I thought love meant luxury. I thought success looked like sparkle. I was wrong. Tada, I knelt beside her. You're not the only one who was wrong. We were all chasing love with a price tag. Tada, she cried harder. I never thanked you for saving Dad, for forgiving us. Tada, I shook my head. Forgiveness isn't a gift, Claire. It's a process. And it starts with accountability. Tada, she nodded slowly, gripping my hand. Will you help me? Tada, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to walk away, to let karma complete its course. But then I thought of my son. The boy who'd once been left to die because of money. And I realized something profound. The greatest revenge isn't mirroring their cruelty. It's ending the cycle. Tada, I'll help you, I said finally. But not like before. I won't fix your problems. I'll teach you how to rebuild. Tada, so I brought her into my company, not as family, but as an employee. She started at the bottom, learning what humility feels like when it replaces entitlement. To her credit, she worked hard, harder than I'd ever seen her work in her life. Tada, meanwhile, my parents watched from a distance, unsure where they fit in anymore. My father had retired quietly, attending therapy after years of denial. My mother began volunteering at hospitals, holding the hands of sick children as if each one was an apology to my son. Jada and me. I kept building, but not for revenge anymore, for redemption. Jada still, sometimes late at night, I'd think about that $85K. The price of my son's life, the cost of their awakening, and I'd realize They had spent 230K on a wedding that didn't last, but it took losing everything to finally learn what love was worth. Ta-ta-ta, time softened the edges of everything, even pain. Months slipped by, and life settled into a rhythm that was quiet, stable, and strangely full. My son, now healthy and full of laughter, became the center of my world. Every giggle, every hug, every sleepy, "I love you, Mommy," reminded me of why I'd fought so hard, not for revenge, but for restoration. One evening, I stood on the balcony of my office building, watching the city lights flicker like distant promises. Behind me, the glass walls reflected my own face, older, steadier, but still carrying the shadows of the past. Claire worked late downstairs, reviewing event budgets with a seriousness that surprised even her. My father had begun sending me weekly letters, handwritten ones, awkward but heartfelt, and my mother had started bringing homemade food every Sunday for my son, staying longer each time. Tada healing doesn't arrive with fanfare. It creeps in quietly, replacing bitterness with understanding. Tada one Sunday evening, my parents arrived earlier than usual. My mother was carrying a casserole dish, my father had a small, neatly wrapped box. My son ran to them, laughing, and for the first time, my father picked him up, gently, almost reverently. He looked at me and said, "He's stronger than all of us." I nodded, holding back tears. "He is." After dinner, my father handed me the box. Inside was a simple silver locket, one I hadn't seen in years. It was my grandmother's. I'd loved it as a child, but my mother had given it to Claire for her wedding day. Now it rested in my palm again. "Tada, she wanted you to have it first," my father said quietly. "We just didn't listen back then." I traced the engraving inside, "To the daughter who never gives up." My grandmother's handwriting. The lump in my throat grew too heavy to swallow. "Tata, why now?" I asked softly. "Tata, because we finally understand what it means to earn forgiveness," he said. "You taught us that. Not with words, but with grace." Chada tears blurred my vision. All those nights I'd stayed awake, hating them, replaying every cruel word, every selfish choice. It all felt so far away now. Because standing here, in the warmth of my home, surrounded by family reborn from the ashes of greed, I realized something profound. Revenge gives power, but forgiveness gives peace. Later that night, I sat with Claire in the office. She looked up from her laptop and smiled faintly. "You ever think we'd get here?" I laughed softly. "Not in a million years." She leaned back, thoughtful. "You know, for a long time, I thought success meant being adored. Having people look at you like you're everything. But now it just means being proud of the reflection in the mirror." Her words hit deep. I looked out the window, the skyline glimmering like hope reborn. "Then I guess," I said, smiling, "we finally made it." The story could have ended there, with redemption, reconciliation, and quiet triumph. But life, in its poetic rhythm, had one more lesson waiting, because sometimes true justice doesn't come from seeing others fall. It comes when you help them rise and watch them become better because of it. It was almost poetic how the universe arranged it. One final, public reckoning. Our company had been nominated for a major humanitarian award for our Rebuild Lives initiative, a charity program that provided medical support to families who couldn't afford surgeries. The same kind of pain I once endured had become the foundation of something that now saved lives. The award ceremony was to be broadcast live. My parents and sister were invited as guests. At first, they hesitated, afraid, perhaps of the ghosts that would sit beside them in the crowd. But I insisted. "If we're healing," I told them, "let's heal in truth, not silence." That night, as I stepped onto the stage, the lights were blinding, warm, golden, almost celestial. I stood before hundreds of faces, a sea of eyes reflecting the kind of respect I'd once begged for from my own family. My heart pounded, but my voice was steady when I began to When I started this company, I didn't do it for glory or fame, I said. I did it because once upon a time, I begged for 85,000. Not for luxury, not for comfort, but to save my child's life. And I was told that money was already spent on something more important. The audience shifted uncomfortably. The silence was heavy. My parents sat in the front row. My father's hands clasped tightly, my mother's eyes glistening. Tadia, I took a deep breath. That moment broke me. But it also built me. It taught me that love isn't proven through words or wealth, but through sacrifice. And tonight, this award isn't mine alone. It belongs to every parent who ever had to choose between dignity and desperation. And to my family who taught me, painfully, what love should never cost. Tauta gasps rippled across the room. My father lowered his head, my mother wiped silent tears. Claire reached for their hands, and as the applause thundered, not for me, but for the truth, I felt a strange peace settle in my chest. Deja, after the ceremony, a reporter approached me. Ms. Hart, she asked, was that story true? Tadza, I smiled faintly. Every word. Deja, later that night, my father approached me in the empty hallway. His face looked older under the soft light, but there was something new in his eyes. Humility. He didn't try to defend, didn't justify. He simply said, I watched you turn our sin into something sacred. You've done what I never could. You've made pain noble. Teja, for a long moment, we stood in silence. Then, for the first time in my life, my father pulled me into an embrace. It wasn't grand or dramatic. It was human. Teja, Dad, I whispered, I forgive you. Teja, he trembled. A proud man brought to tears not by failure, but by grace. Tata, as we left the hall together, the world outside sparkled with rain, reflections of light scattered across the pavement. My mother took my hand, my sister walked beside us, and my son, my miracle, ran ahead, laughing. Cherja, in that moment, I understood what poetic justice truly meant. It wasn't about revenge or reversal. It was about breaking a cycle, turning the wound into a doorway. Tata, we had all blood, all learned, all healed. And as we walked beneath the streetlights, it no longer felt like a family shattered. It felt like one reborn. Tajao Jakita 6 months after the award ceremony. Our charity initiative, Rebuild Lives, had grown beyond anything I'd imagined. What began as a single act of redemption had become a nationwide network of hope. Hospitals partnered with us, doctors volunteered, and families who had once been told, no, were now being told, we'll find a way. Each story healed a piece of me. Every child saved felt like rewriting a chapter of my own past. Taja, one morning, I stood in the pediatric ward of a hospital we'd recently funded. Bright murals colored the walls. Astronauts, butterflies, heroes with tiny smiles drawn by children themselves. My son held my hand as we walked through, his laughter echoing down the hallway. The doctor introduced us to a young boy awaiting surgery, his mother clutching his hand, fear and love fighting for space in her eyes. Dada, as we spoke, I saw myself in her. The desperation. The hope. The quiet prayer that someone, anyone, would care enough to help. I reached into my bag and handed her the approval letter for the operation. She stared at it, speechless, before collapsing into tears. Teja, why would you help us? She whispered. Teja, smiled gently. Because once, someone told me my son's life wasn't worth the $85,000. And I promised myself no parent would ever hear that again. Teja, the woman sobbed and hugged me. My son squeezed my hand tighter. In that moment, everything, every scar, every sleepless night, every tear, felt worth it. Teja, my family had changed too. My father volunteered as a consultant for small family businesses, using his mistakes as lessons instead of secrets. My mother managed the foundation's Heart Fund, a program supporting mothers in crisis. And Claire had become my right hand at the company, handling public relations with newfound sincerity and humility. Dada, at our family dinners, the air was lighter now. We laughed, not the performative laughter of old times, but genuine, warm, and sometimes tearful. My father would tell my son stories about how Grandpa once thought he knew everything, and how he was saved by daughter who knew better. Dada, every time. My mother's eyes would soften, pride laced with quiet sorrow. You've turned our greatest shame into light, she said once, her voice trembling. That's not something we deserve, Rachel. But you gave it to us anyway. Tata, I took her hand. Because love isn't about what people deserve, Mom. It's about what we choose to give, even when it's hard. Tata, later that night, as I tucked my son into bed, he asked, Mom, do you ever wish things had been different? Tata, I thought for a long moment before answering. No, sweetheart. If they were different, maybe we wouldn't have become who we are. Maybe we wouldn't know how strong love can be. Tata, he smiled sleepily. You're the bravest person I know. Tedao, I kissed his forehead. No, honey. I just learned that even the darkest stories can end in light. If you keep writing. Tedao, outside, the city glowed. Not with the artificial glitter of wealth, but with the quiet, golden light of redemption. I realized then that my revenge had already been served. Not through pain or punishment, but through transformation. Tada. Because the sweetest revenge is not watching others fall. It's rising so high that the pain which once defined you becomes the fire that warms others. It happened exactly 2 years after that night, the night my world had shifted forever. We were hosting our annual Rebuild Lives Gala, this time not in a grand hotel, but in the very community center where my son's first recovery fundraiser had failed years ago. Back then, only 5 people showed up. Tonight, there were hundreds, doctors, families, of volunteers, people whose lives had been touched by our work. The air hummed with warmth and purpose. No chandeliers, no gold drapes, just string lights, laughter, and stories that mattered. Every table carried framed photos of children who had survived because someone cared enough to say yes. When I stepped onto the stage, my son was beside me, older now, strong and beaming with pride. He was the living proof of everything we'd fought for. Good evening. I began, my voice steady but heavy with emotion. 2 years ago, I stood on this same floor, not as a founder, not as a success story, but as a mother begging for help. That night, I learned that sometimes the people you love most will let you down. But I also learned something greater. That love can rebuild what money destroys. The crowd was silent, listening. My parents sat in the front row again. My mother's hands were clasped in prayer, my father's eyes glassy. Claire sat beside them, her arm around both. Tonight, I continued. We've raised enough funds to perform 200 pediatric surgeries across the country. That's 200 families who won't hear the word no.